Next, I'd like to bring up Ms. Priya Phillips, who is giving a talk. She's an Army Reserve Judge Advocate and Trial Defense Counsel, and she is talking about climbing a moving wall, the systemic inequities faced by servicewomen.
I am also a 5'2" short Asian woman. Good morning, and in all seriousness, it is such an honor to be here with all of you today. As was just said, we are clearly serving in a military today of great consequence and a time of great potential, but also great risk. And so my name is Priya Phillips, and I'm going to jump in for time's sake, but the reason I'm here is, can I get the slide switched over? Okay. Is the original Captain Phillips is to the right. So I'm here as the junior. I grew up thinking that the military was run by women. I had this woman coming home every day. And so I didn't really realize that, you know, this world out there was so difficult. And it wasn't until I was an adult that she would tell me that before she'd come pick me up from daycare, she would cry in her car after spending a long day at work. And she asked me, you know, Priya, are you sure you want to join the Army? She was the biggest anti-recruiter I had ever met. So again, I was born at Fort Polk, now known as Fort Johnson. She says that's the best thing that ever happened to her there. I don't know if that's true. I'm a civilian attorney. I am also a policy advisor on military readiness, as well as a judge advocate. With the U.S. Army Reserves, I have deployed with Operation Spartan Shield, Operation Inherent Resolve. I have been the Aviators JAG. I was just with the 36th Infantry Division's Combat Aviation Brigade. So to all the pilots that are here, I have a special place in my heart for all of you. I think all of my gray hairs are from most of you. But again, the best job that I've had is that I am a trial defense attorney. I defend those who defend America. But I'm here today because as a JAG, I get to see this large swath of the military. And then I get to study, and I get to learn patterns about people and our community. And so just to pause, you will not want to see a JAG. Nobody wants to visit the JAG, so I get that. Nobody wants to see their lawyer. At some point in your career, you will meet friction. And a lot of the women in this room are women that are going to walk towards friction. So please remember my name. My name is Priya Phillips. I might not be your lawyer, but I will get you the right regulation, or I'll get you the right person. Please, you know, keep my name, find me in Global, because you will not know when the friction is about to hit you. And so I think that for today, the biggest questions we face, and this is the theme that we've been talking about, is how do we face, as women, this big, large-scale institution that's not made for us, obviously, and not just survive, but thrive long enough to improve the system, right? So we're trying to do survival mechanisms, thriving, and also system improvement. And so I really hope that this short presentation will give you some information, but also some context on systemic barriers and your place within those systemic barriers. So it kind of seems really silly to teach systemic barriers facing military women to military women who are experts in alleviating systemic barriers. So I'm going to kind of just skip that, because everyone here has either witnessed or experienced firsthand those systemic barriers. So for the sake of time, we're just going to, you know, acknowledge that it is very difficult to be a woman in the military. But I hope that in this presentation, we can provide some information of where we stand, both individually and systemically. Let's start with the facts we know. We've kind of gone over it today. We know that the military has the most women it has ever had in its history, hovering right around under 20%. And we know that women have an increasing presence throughout ground forces, combatant commands. We have seen women in combat roles. We are seeing women serve as generals. We're seeing them as admirals. So the glass ceiling has been cracked, right? We have women that are serving in the top leadership positions in many different offices across the country, both as DoD and also as civilian personnel. But for me, as a JAG, when people come to me, things are generally falling apart, right? People don't come to visit, they don't come and bring the birthday cake. It's not fun when you have to go see the JAG. I get that. So I was seeing all these empirical studies that are saying that things are improving for women. There are women generals, there are women admirals, but the first-hand experience, the lived-in experience of women that I was meeting, whether they were E1s or O6s, was just very different. Instead, women were coming to me of all ranks, and they were saying, I see other women doing it. I see them managing their career. I see them happily married. I see them with children. They have this, ambiguous work-life balance type thing. And I see them going to Sergeant Major Academy, having supportive spouses, but I don't understand why that's not happening to me. And so when these women try to take that next step, they tell me, I don't get to see my kids. My marriage is suffering. My boss is making snide remarks about my leadership ability. So if those women are making it as generals, and they're making it as colonels, and they're making it into these senior leadership positions, why am I struggling? Why am I not going from survival to that thrive mentality that I am the successful projection of what I'm seeing out in the world right now? So what's happening for many women is that they see these women generals, these command sergeant majors, these women rangers, and even in the civilian side, these C-suite leaders in the corporate world, and they all are incredible change makers. They're doing it, and they're asking themselves, why can't I overcome those systemic barriers? And yes, they are all trailblazers, and they're asking, if the trail has already been set, if those people have already made those pathways, why can't I follow? And I am a perfect example of somebody who truly thought when they joined the military that we were an inclusive and integrated force, because I grew up with a male military spouse father. I grew up with a father who wore an aloha shirt and just showed up to command functions. He didn't have to bring a dish. Like, he had no expectation to join the family readiness group. He didn't care. He was the dad, and he was praised and loved and adored just for existing as a father, while my mother was sitting in the car before daycare crying. And I just found that out a few years ago. So that was the kind of dynamic that I grew up with, and I thought, that's amazing, like everyone's going to join the military. And then I became a JAG, and I realized it didn't matter what rank you were, it didn't matter what position, it didn't matter what branch. Women were struggling on their day-to-day commitments so that they could strive and reach that level of excellence, that their competence, their skills, their qualities, the things that they expected of themselves. And they didn't think, wow, the military is sexist. I don't think I really have ever had a woman come up to me and say, wow, the military is so sexist. They internalized it on themselves, and for whatever reason that they couldn't become a colonel, it was their fault. So, like good leaders, they never made excuses, and as women, we want to kind of overcome those barriers, usually through sheer survival. And so, as we've seen, we know that we ignore the snide comments, we push through, we wait to have kids, we take on dual burdens of managing our career and home, and when we can't juggle it all, and we do face failure, we internalize it as our own fault, and like good leaders, we don't make excuses, and we self-select, we leave. So, some of the stats that we've heard today are that women make up 17% of our military, but we are 28% more likely to be separated than our male counterparts. We are more likely to self-select ourselves or be pushed out. And hundreds of women have cited things like deployments, male-oriented culture, discrimination, family planning, sexual harassment, and dependent care as the reasons they chose to leave. And I personally hate the phrase self-select, because that implies that we are choosing to not be able to stay. That we're just like, you know what, I think I'll just step back. Not that we were doing our best to preserve ourselves, our careers, and our families, and and not ever admitting that the military was not congruent for that. So the last big statistic I want to tell you is that we see women generals, but in the course of American history, there have been 830 four-star generals, 430 generals and admirals at the four-star level. How many of them have been women? 10. So the honest truth is, like, those are some really bad odds. Like, that's like that to me. I'm not I'm sure there's some economists or statisticians who can tell me those are objectively not good odds, right? So again, we know that systemic barriers exist. We know that policy and regulatory modifications, I like the word modifications better than accommodations, because we know that whenever the military makes a accommodation or a modification, both men and women rise. Like, for example, the parental leave, all different types of accommodations. They make the entirety of the military ready, but then they label it, oh, that's a woman's problem. But then the men and the women are both benefiting. A corporate study in 1994 of Fortune 500 firms found that family supportive HR practices exponentially increased the proportion of women in senior management over the subsequent 5 years. The study was re-examined in 2023, and the firms that initiated those practices in 1995 now are seeing the most diversity in senior leadership because of those investments 30 years ago. So again, we're all trying to serve on our own terms, but it's almost like we're part of this grand experiment that's been going on for 100 years. And yet, like I look at that study and I'm like, wait, are we the guinea pigs that are in the next, and apparently they're not collecting our data while they're running the experiment on this, and I think that's even more insulting. So again, we're all trying to serve on our own terms and get that agency and autonomy through those accommodations, through these lifting principles, right? But we really are living through some of the greatest transformations of our military right now. And the whole point is that we stay in long enough, we refuse to be pushed out, and we try to not self-select on our own terms so that we can create that dynamic systemic change. And so, like I said, I didn't even list out the systemic barriers because you all are all experts. There's no reason for me to. But in the role of who we are as people, I think that I'm grateful for the trailblazers. I really am. Whether you're an E1 or an 06, though, you are audacious for facing these barriers and prevailing in spite of them. Your career, your health, your sheer presence and desire to serve are a driving transformation of our military. And so our job as women collectively is to preserve ourselves so that we can stay in the fight and to sustain our social networks, our autonomy, our strength, our competencies, so that we can create this better system that we need to be the military that we need to face the nation's challenges. So we stand again on that incredible legacy, and the glass ceiling has been cracked. But every woman here is still a trailblazer. We can't just imagine that, yes, there's a general and the trail has been set. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure we're still in that 1994 study, and apparently we need to go all make sure that our data is being collected. So again, we are left with a vague leadership labyrinth. We do not have a glass ceiling to rely on. Despite increased representation, military women have a different and strenuous career path. And through the disappearance of the glass ceiling, we are taught to believe that these systemic barriers are not enough to end your career, and that if you want a career in the military, it's equally accessible. And that is just not true. And if it was true, 28% of us would not be more likely to separate than our male counterparts. My final thought is that that statistic should remind you of your place in our military. Everyone here is 28% more likely to separate from the military than their male counterpart due to the systemic burdens placed upon you. Knowing that fact, you still chose to serve. The ultimate assessment of who you are is that you knew what was happening, unlike me, but you knew what you were getting into, and you decided, of all of the places you could serve, you still decided to serve here. And so, to be a woman in the military today is still stressful. It's amazing, it's dangerous, but it's really an audacious place to be, and each of us chose this life. And so, my third final thought, I guess, is that by being a woman in the military, it is still audacious. And regardless of your rank or position, your sheer presence and your desire to serve in itself makes you a trailblazer, a person who is weighing the scale towards equity and systemic fairness. And so, to close, thank you each for your service.